New Year's Eve in Grandma's house was always quiet, familiar, and oddly comforting. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine, the faint scent of last night's baked cookies still lingering in the air. The warm glow of string lights reflected softly off the polished wooden floors, stretching the shadows into long, lazy shapes that moved gently as the light flickered. I wandered slowly through the rooms, touching the smooth edges of the furniture, the familiar grooves in the banister, the worn texture of the carpet beneath my feet. Each sound, the soft hum of the heater, the faint creak of the floorboards, the gentle rustle of curtains in the breeze, was amplified in the quiet evening, creating a rhythm I had come to associate with safety and routine. Grandma was bustling in the kitchen, humming softly, moving with a careful, deliberate pace. The soft clatter of pots and pans, the faint hiss of the stove, the delicate fragrance of baked bread and tea leaves, all of it filled the house like a gentle wave. She was preparing for the countdown, a ritual she insisted on every year, a tradition that was always calm, always orderly. I sat by the window for a while, watching the bare trees outside sway slowly in the winter wind. The cold pressed against the glass, faintly chilling my fingertips as I traced the outlines of frost patterns. I felt the warmth of the house seep into my bones, the faint pressure of comfort and routine settling around me like a soft blanket. Grandma called us quietly from the kitchen, her voice calm, even. "Time to get ready," she said, not with excitement, but with a quiet insistence that carried a weight I didn't understand yet. I looked around the room, noting the usual decorations. The paper garlands, the tinsel, the small lights twinkling gently, the old clock ticking steadily. Everything was familiar, ordinary, safe. But there was a subtle tension beneath it all, a rhythm I couldn't name. It was not fear, not yet, only a quiet, persistent awareness that something about this year's ritual felt different. As we gathered near Grandma, she leaned down, her eyes calm but firm. "When the countdown begins, you'll hide," she said softly. Her words were casual, almost like a habit, yet I felt a flicker of unease in my chest. Hide. I didn't question her, of course. Grandma had rules, always quiet, always deliberate, and we obeyed without argument. But even as I nodded, I felt the first, faint tickle of something unfamiliar, a subtle pressure in the air, a hint of tension weaving itself into the warmth around me. I looked around at my siblings, their faces calm, unaware, and wondered why the word hide carried such weight, why the house suddenly seemed a little colder, a little heavier, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward midnight, each second deliberate, echoing softly through the quiet house. The warmth, the smell of baked bread, the soft glow of lights, it all felt distant now, filtered through the subtle tension that had begun to settle in my chest. And as I followed Grandma's quiet instructions, moving slowly toward the designated hiding place, I realized I had no idea why we were hiding, or what we were supposed to be hiding from. I curled into the small space she had shown us, feeling the familiar textures of the furniture pressed around me, the soft rug beneath my knees, the gentle brush of air from the slightly open door. The room was warm, yet I could feel the faint chill of anticipation pressing against my skin. The shadows stretched long and still, pooling in corners where the light didn't reach, and I listened to the house breathe, counting the seconds, the faint hum of the heater, the soft creak of the floor. The countdown was approaching. I could feel it in the air, a subtle pressure that grew with each passing minute, wrapping itself around the rhythm of the house, around my own heartbeat. I did not understand it yet. I could not name it, but I knew with a quiet, insistent certainty that something was different this year. Something patient, deliberate, and unavoidable was waiting. And as the first faint sounds of voices began to rise from the kitchen, counting softly, almost casually, I pressed myself further into the shadows, feeling the textures of the hiding place, tracing every detail, every groove, every imperfection. I listened, I waited, and the quiet tension settled around me, patient and unyielding. I huddled in the small space Grandma had shown us, the walls pressing gently against my sides, the rug soft beneath my knees. The warmth of the house seemed distant here, filtered through shadows that pooled in the corners, stretching and bending with the flickering light from the next room. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint hum of the heater, felt louder than it should, magnified in the quiet stillness. From the kitchen, I could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps, the gentle clatter of dishes, and Grandma's calm voice counting down. 10, 9. The sound was ordinary, everyday, yet it pressed against me, slow and insistent, like a pulse in the air itself. My chest tightened. I wondered why we were hiding. I had followed her instructions without question for as long as I could remember, yet something this year felt different. I shifted slightly, careful not to disturb the quiet, and felt the textures of my hiding place. The smooth wood of the table leg brushing my arm, the soft pile of the rug beneath my fingers, the faint chill in the air as it moved through the cracks in the door. Shadows flickered, bending as the light from the kitchen spilled into the hallway, stretching across the floor. I could hear my own breath, faint and uneven, mingling with the distant sounds of the countdown. 8, 7. I pressed myself closer into the corner, trying to make myself smaller, quieter. My mind raced, tracing small possibilities. Nothing would happen, it was just a ritual, just tradition. Yet the uncertainty settled in my chest like a weight I could not lift. Something in the way Grandma counted, so calm, so deliberate, seemed deliberate in a way that was unsettling. I imagined her glancing at us, the children, in the living room, her eyes calm but firm. Is she watching more than just us? The thought was almost ridiculous, and yet I could not shake it. I pictured shadows moving beyond the kitchen light, stretching across the walls, pooling around corners, waiting. My fingers traced the texture of the rug, the grain of the table leg, grounding me in the physical, even as my mind drifted further into unease. 6, 5. I felt a shiver run along my spine, subtle but insistent. The air seemed heavier now, carrying the faint scent of candles and pine, but something else as well, a metallic tang, faint, almost imperceptible. My heartbeat quickened, not in panic, but in recognition that the ordinary rules of the house, the warmth, the light, the routine, were subtly off. I tried to whisper to myself, to rationalize. It's just tradition. Nothing will happen. Grandma wouldn't. But the words faltered. My chest pressed with quiet tension. Shadows seemed to linger longer, darker, stretching just slightly beyond the light's reach. The house, so familiar and safe, now carried a weight of expectation, as if it were waiting for something to unfold. 4, 3. My mind circled, tracing every small detail. The slight tilt of the clock on the wall, the way the curtain flickered with a draft, the soft, almost imperceptible creak that came from the stairs. Everything familiar now carried a subtle tension. Every texture, every scent, every sound became magnified, each small anomaly feeding the sense that something, patient, deliberate, inevitable, was approaching. 2, 1. I pressed myself into the shadows, feeling the textures of the rug and the table, the faint chill in the air brushing my face, trying to make myself smaller, quieter, invisible. I had no understanding of why, but a quiet certainty settled in my chest. This new year, this ritual, would not be like the others. Something was different. Something was waiting. The final second hung in the air, drawn out, patient. My breath caught, and in that small, still space, I realized I could no longer tell if the tension was coming from the house, or from myself. And then, silence. After that night, the ritual replayed in my mind endlessly. The memory of hiding, pressed into the shadows, feeling the textures of the rug and table beneath my fingertips, lingered longer than any ordinary memory should. The air of Grandma's house seemed heavier now, filled with the subtle pressure of anticipation that I could not explain. I found myself moving through the rooms more slowly than usual, noticing details I had ignored before. The faint tilt of the picture frames, the slightly uneven placement of chairs, the way shadows pooled in the corners and lingered longer than they should. Each small detail reinforced the sense that the ordinary fabric of the house was subtly altered. Every day I kept thinking about the hiding place. I imagined it empty, quiet, but filled with something patient, deliberate, waiting. Sometimes, when I passed the living room, I felt the shadows shift in ways I could not rationalize, bending around corners, pooling behind furniture. I told myself it was imagination. I repeated it like a mantra. It's just shadows. It's just a game. It's just Grandma's ritual. Yet the tension persisted. One evening, I noticed something I had never seen before. A faint indentation on the rug where I had crouched during the countdown, a slight curve in the corner of the couch that I was certain hadn't been there before. The details were small, almost imperceptible, but they pressed into my awareness. My chest tightened as I catalogued each anomaly. "It's nothing," I whispered to myself. But the whisper felt hollow. I returned to the hiding space repeatedly, touching the rug, tracing the edges of the furniture, memorizing each texture, each subtle imperfection. The house seemed to breathe differently now, its rhythm slower, heavier. The faint hum of the heater, the distant tick of the clock, the soft creak of the floorboards, each sound amplified the quiet tension that had begun to weave itself into the fabric of my consciousness. At night, I would lie awake, listening to the faint movement of the house, the shadows shifting subtly across the walls, the wind brushing against the windows. I would imagine the moments before the countdown, the way Grandma's voice had been calm, deliberate, almost too deliberate. I tried to convince myself it was all ordinary, familiar, safe, but a quiet, insistent unease pressed against me. I began to notice patterns. The shadows in the corner seemed to linger in the same places each time, the subtle noises always followed the same rhythm, and the faint pressure in the air remained consistent, patient, deliberate. The ordinary had become deliberate. The familiar had become threatening, though silently, almost invisibly. I whispered to myself again and again, "It's just tradition. It's just hiding. Nothing will happen." Yet even as the words left my lips, the sense of inevitability pressed against my chest, slow, steady, relentless. I could feel the pattern solidifying, threading itself into the very rhythm of the house, and I realized, though I did not yet fully understand, that each repetition, each quiet compliance, each moment of stillness was reinforcing it. By the time night fell again, I could no longer distinguish the ordinary from the deliberate. Every creak, every shift of shadow, every faint brush of air against my skin reminded me that the ritual was not just a game. It was patient, it was deliberate, it was inevitable, and I, silently, had begun to participate in its quiet orchestration. I left the hiding place reluctantly, feeling the textures of the rug and furniture beneath my fingers one last time. The air was still heavy, the shadows long, the rhythm of the house altered subtly but unmistakably. And I understood, with a slow, suffocating clarity, that the pattern was consolidating. It was no longer just a ritual, it was a presence, patient and persistent, woven into every corner, every sound, every shadow. And I could do nothing but wait. The days after the first countdown passed in a haze of quiet unease. I moved through Grandma's house with measured steps, noticing every detail. The faint tilt of a picture frame, the subtle wear in the carpet, the way shadows pooled along the corners and refused to disperse. The ordinary, familiar textures of home now carried an unspoken tension. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. It's tradition. It's just hiding. It's just shadows. The words felt hollow. Every subtle creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light, every draft brushing against the curtains pressed against my chest, slow and deliberate, persistent. My rational mind whispered explanations, but my body, my senses, refused comfort. I caught myself replaying the moments before the countdown, over and over. The way Grandma's voice was calm, almost too calm. The careful placement of the chairs and decorations. The shadows stretching along the walls. My chest tightened with quiet dread as I realized the ritual was not simply tradition, it was a framework, deliberate and precise, threading something into the very rhythm of the house. I tried to speak to my siblings, to ask if they felt it too, but the words died in my throat. They moved through the house as though nothing had changed, unaware of the subtle pressure pressing in the corners, lingering beneath the hum of the heater, beneath the soft clatter of dishes, beneath the ordinary warmth of candles and pine. And I knew they would not see it. Only I could. Each night, I lay awake, tracing the familiar textures of the room with my fingers, cataloging every subtle anomaly. The shifting shadows, the tiny sounds, the faint chill that pressed against my skin. I whispered to myself, soft, almost inaudible, maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe I'm overreacting. But the quiet certainty in my chest persisted. The ritual, the hiding, the countdown, it was patient, deliberate, inevitable. And I had done nothing to interrupt it. I began to feel a creeping guilt, subtle and persistent. Should I have questioned her? Should I have resisted? Should I have done something differently? Each thought pressed softly, inexorably, weaving itself into the rhythm of my awareness. I understood that the choices I had made, or refused to make, were part of the pattern. My compliance, my silence, my quiet observation, all had weight. Even during the day, the house felt different. Shadows lingered longer, sounds echoed softly but unnaturally, and the air carried a faint, metallic tang I could not place. The ordinary warmth, the sense of baking and pine, the soft hum of the heater, they all felt filtered, tainted by anticipation. Something patient, deliberate, inevitable was threading itself through the house, and I felt its weight with every breath. I tried to ground myself in small routines, tidying the rooms, preparing tea, tracing the familiar rhythms of everyday life. But nothing could dispel the quiet pressure, the subtle insistence of inevitability that had begun to settle into every corner. I understood, slowly, suffocatingly, that the ritual was no longer just a tradition, it was a presence. Patient, deliberate, unyielding. And I knew, in the quiet tension pressing against my chest, that the next countdown would arrive. The ritual would unfold again. And my choices, my hesitation, my silence would determine everything. New Year's Eve arrived again, quietly, without fanfare, but with the same weight in the air that had pressed against me since the first ritual. The house smelled of pine and candles, of baked bread and tea, familiar and comforting, yet tinged with subtle tension. Shadows stretched across the floor, bending slightly as the flickering light from the kitchen illuminated the edges of the rooms. I moved through the house slowly, tracing the familiar textures beneath my fingers. The worn rug, the polished edge of the table, the smooth wood of the staircase railing. Each step was deliberate, careful, measured. The photographs of previous New Year's still lay on the table, their images of smiling family members framed by subtle, almost imperceptible shadows, the same patient, lingering shapes I had noticed before. Grandma's voice called softly from the kitchen. "Time to hide," she said, calm, even deliberate. I nodded, my chest tightening as I felt the quiet weight of anticipation pressing around me. This year, unlike before, I hesitated. My rational mind urged me to question, to step back, to resist. Why are we hiding? What is really happening? But the habitual part of me, the obedient child shaped by years of ritual, responded instead with quiet compliance. I moved toward the hiding place, following the instructions without argument, letting the familiar textures and shadows guide me. Every creak of the floorboard, every subtle shift in light, every soft rustle of the curtains seemed amplified, magnified, deliberate. I whispered to myself softly, "It's tradition. It's just hiding. Nothing will happen." The words offered a thin comfort, but the subtle pressure pressing into my chest refused relief. I could feel it settle around me, patient, deliberate, inevitable. My choice had weight now. Every hesitation, every small compliance, every act of quiet observation fed the rhythm of the ritual, strengthened the presence threading through the house. I crouched into the hiding space, pressing against the rug, tracing the familiar lines of the furniture, listening to the faint hum of the heater, the distant shuffle of Grandma moving about the kitchen. My mind raced with unspoken questions, but I did nothing. I stayed silent. I waited. I obeyed. The countdown began. 10, 9. I pressed myself lower into the shadows, feeling the textures beneath my fingers, feeling the faint chill in the air brush against my face. Each number echoed in my chest, each second a subtle tightening of inevitability. I could leave. I could stop this. I could resist. But I did not. The quiet choice to do nothing became my answer. 3, 2, 1. I remained hidden, silent, still. The ordinary warmth of the house, the faint scents, the soft lights, all pressed against me in their familiarity, but beneath it lay the subtle weight of something patient and deliberate. Shadows seemed to linger longer, the air thickened, and I understood with a slow, suffocating certainty, my inaction, my quiet compliance, had consequences. The pattern, the ritual, the presence threading through the house, had been reinforced. The soft exhale of the house, the gentle creak of the floorboards, the faint rustle of curtains, everything continued as normal, yet nothing was the same. I had made my choice, and now, the quiet inevitability settled in around me, unyielding, patient, waiting for the consequences to unfold. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm of the house, feeling the textures beneath my fingers, and understood that this simple, quiet decision, obedience, compliance, silence, had weight, and there would be no undoing it. Morning came without announcement. No sudden light, no sharp sounds, just a pale, diluted gray slipping through the thin curtains and settling softly on the walls. The house felt different immediately. Not broken, not damaged, simply lighter in one place, heavier everywhere else. I woke before anyone else. The air in my room was cool, almost stale, as if it had been holding still for hours. I sat up slowly, listening. No voices, no footstep, just the low, constant hum of the heater and the faint ticking of the clock somewhere down the hall. I stepped into the corridor. The floorboards were cold under my feet. Each step felt louder than it should have been, not because of sound, but because of attention. The house seemed to notice me moving. In the living room, the lights were still on. The decorations hadn't been touched. The garlands hung exactly where they had the night before. The chairs stood around the table in their usual places. Almost. One chair was pulled back slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice if you were looking carefully. Just enough to suggest someone had stood up and never returned. I stopped walking. The space around that chair felt hollow. Not empty in the way a room feels empty, but absent, as if something had been carefully removed and the air had not yet decided how to fill the gap. I felt it in my chest first, a slow, sinking pressure that spread outward, quiet and unmistakable. Grandma stood in the kitchen, pouring tea. Her movements were calm, steady, unhurried. She did not look at the empty chair. "Good morning," she said gently, as if nothing were unusual. I wanted to ask. The question rose in me fully formed. "Where is?" But it never left my mouth. I sat down. Not in that chair. In my own. The cup she handed me was warm. The tea smelled familiar. Cinnamon. Herbs. Comfort. My hands trembled slightly as I wrapped them around the mug. No one mentioned the absence. My siblings moved through the room slowly, quietly, avoiding the empty space without seeming to realize they were doing so. Plates were set. Food was served. Conversation remained soft and ordinary. Plans for the day. The weather. Small things. The gap remained. As the morning stretched on, I noticed how carefully everyone moved around it. How no one stood too close. How no one reached across it. It was as if the house itself had redrawn its boundaries overnight. I looked at Grandma. She met my eyes for just a moment. There was no threat there. No warning. Only understanding. And something else beneath it. Relief, perhaps. Or certainty. I understood then that hiding had not been about safety. It had been about order. The house needed stillness during the countdown. Silence. Absence. Someone always needed to be out of sight when the numbers reached 0. Someone needed to be misplaced. And this year, the pattern had chosen. The realization did not arrive with fear. It arrived with resignation. A quiet acknowledgement that this had happened before, that it would happen again, that Grandma had never forced us to hide. She had only asked, and we had always obeyed. I finished my tea. It had gone cold without me noticing. The decorations continued to glow softly. Outside, the day moved on. Cars passed. Wind stirred the trees. The world did not pause. The house settled. As evening approached, I found myself standing near the old hiding place. I didn't crouch down. I didn't touch it. I only looked. The shadows there felt deeper now, more complete. I realized, with a calm that frightened me more than panic ever could, that next year, when the countdown begins, Grandma will ask again. And I will know exactly why. I will hide. And the house will decide who is missing when morning comes. The clock ticked softly behind me. I did not turn around. And the house remained quiet.